Hey guys, my name is Rob Noire, and today I have a video for you all about the Polymega retro gaming system. Now this is a system that had been hyped up for a long time, and we finally got a release trailer along with a bunch of details about the system itself. And as a result, there's been a lot of talk online and a little bit of controversy and some other stuff. And basically, this is a console that will let you play retro games in HD. And as you might be aware, I have an entire series on this channel all about playing various systems in HD, and as a result I've gotten a bunch of people asking me, like, what's your thoughts on this thing? With all the controversy, what are you thinking? How do you feel about it? Do you think it's good? Yada yada yada, and just generally asking like my opinion. And so I thought, instead of trying to reply to a bunch of comments and everything else, why not just make a video where I can kind of get into it, and if you're someone who doesn't know about any of these issues or about the console itself, maybe this way you can learn a little bit about it and make a decision for yourself if this is something you're interested in. So first off, for those of you who aren't familiar with the system, what is the Polymega? Well, as I mentioned, the Polymega is a modern system designed to let you play your old retro games in HD, like on an HD TV or an HD monitor or anything like that. Now, this system is in a lot of ways unique and in a lot of ways something that we've kind of seen before. Now, this is what they're calling a modular system, and the way it works is there's basically a base unit, like your core console, and this actually has like a CD disk drive in it. And so this core unit can actually play a bunch of disk-based games like PlayStation 1, they mentioned, I think, TurboGrafx and other systems that play off of disks. You can play it using this base unit, and this is the main thing that's sold. And now after that, there are a bunch of add-on units that they call modules designed to let you play games from other consoles like the NES, the Famicom, the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, and these basically snap onto the top of the console. And these modules have controller ports letting you use the original controllers, and they do come with their own controllers. And these, they let you snap in the actual cartridges and then play them on the console itself. So everything I'm saying so far, other than maybe the CD part, this is probably something you've heard of before, and it's probably giving you flashbacks to the Retron 5. The Retron 5 is a clone console by Hyperkin, which lets you do pretty much the same thing, snapping cartridges and play them in HD on your HD TV. The Retron 5 is a purely emulation-based machine. It uses emulators much like a computer, and it has like all the cartridge slots and everything just lined up on the console itself. Now the Polymega uses these modules, meaning you could theoretically just buy the module for the consoles that you're interested in, not have to buy the modules for all the others, and maybe kind of save some money that way. Like maybe, I don't know, if you don't really care for anything Sega, you can just ignore all that. Now, other than what the base unit with its disk drive offers, the majority of the consoles that you'll be able to play using this thing have been supported on other clone consoles in some way, although they are claiming that they will include support for some others which haven't really been. Like there's like a top tier for like N64 and all this other stuff. I'll talk a little bit more about it in the moment there. So everything I just told you, I mean, it sounds pretty standard. It sounds kind of like a new take on something you've heard of before, and it's all pretty much above board. Now, the reason why there was so much hype for this thing, the reason why people were so excited, is because they were claiming that everything was going to be FPGA based. Now, if you don't know what an FPGA is, it is a field programmable gate array. A lot of companies have used FPGAs to do amazing things for retro consoles. For example, the company Analog has created an HD NES and an HD Super Nintendo called the Analog NT Mini and the Super NT using FPGA hardware. And an FPGA basically allows you to recreate a console on a hardware level so that it runs exactly like the original console. It's not like a program like an emulator. It's an actual hardware that functions the exact same way as the original hardware of the console would. And because of that, you can create something that's incredibly accurate, like 99% accuracy to the original hardware. And Analog has done this with, like I said, the NES and the Super Nintendo, and another company called Retro USB also did it with the NES. And so it's been proven that you can do really amazing things with this. And because of how accurate this is and how much you can actually do with it, a lot of people, myself included, consider FPGA-based clone consoles to be the future of retro gaming, playing off of the original cartridges, original discs, original whatever. And because the Polymega was saying that everything was going to be FPGA-based, this was like a huge deal, like an almost perfectly accurate representation of all the consoles that they were talking about, many of which have never gotten that kind of treatment before. I mean, other than NES and Super Nintendo, there hasn't really been much in terms of FPGA retro gaming. So I mean, like everything for Sega and all the other consoles, PlayStation 1 on the base unit, this was a huge deal. And now, one of the reasons that there has been controversy around the release of the Polymega is the fact that they have removed the FPGA from the majority of the stuff that they're doing. Now, the base unit itself no longer has an FPGA in it. It is now strictly emulation, much like the Retron 5 or other clone consoles. And they said that the reason they did this is to allow them to also support the Sega Saturn. And a lot of people are really hyped about the fact that they're supporting the Sega Saturn because, to the best of my knowledge, and I did a little bit of research, there have never really been any clone consoles that support the Saturn, meaning you would have to play it on original hardware. And now there's this thing which supports it, which means you could play your Saturn in HD, which is very exciting for any Sega Saturn fans out there. A lot of people were super hype, and they were saying that this is the reason why they removed the FPGA. Now, right off the bat, this sounded a little bit strange to me and to a lot of others because, well, if the FPGA was already able to handle a bunch of other consoles, like the PlayStation 1 and various others, why now suddenly could it not handle also the Sega Saturn? And also something to note is that Sega Saturn emulation, in general, is pretty terrible. I mean, I would rank it up there with like N64 emulation. Like, it's really bad in general. So instead of running that off of an FPGA, you're gonna use an emulator, which is bad already. Like, hopefully the emulator that they're using is much better than what is usually available, but already that sounded weird. And then there was controversy because in their very cool trailer that they did, and I gotta hand it to them, their editors did an amazing job. It was very slick, very well done, very well presented. But in the trailer, they showed footage of the Sega Saturn, except the footage they showed was actually from an arcade version of a game that was also on the Saturn. They didn't actually use footage that was captured off of the Polymega. And because of that, a lot of people were doing like a witch hunt and being like, oh, you guys are liars, you even support the Saturn. Honestly, at this point, it seems to be an actual editing error. I think either it is exactly as they said and just their editor had a lot of footage and he just picked the wrong one, maybe it wasn't correctly labeled, or maybe at the time, the game that they wanted to show for the most impact, they weren't able to get running perfectly or just didn't look as good as this other footage. I don't know. Obviously, when you're presenting a video, you want everything to look as perfect as possible, and it could have been an oversight or it could have been somewhat intentional, and then obviously it was still supported. Anyways, at this point, they have released a bunch of footage of Sega Saturn games running on the Polymega on their YouTube channel, so it's safe to say that their Saturn emulator at least somewhat works at this point. So it really does seem like just an error in judgment on their part, however it happened. So setting aside the Sega Saturn issue, this brings up the larger issue, the FPGA removal from the console itself, because that's what got so many people, myself included, excited about this thing in the first place. I mean, without the FPGA, what really is there to offer? Who is this console now marketed towards? Because originally when FPGA was in there, it was being marketed to everyone, like casuals and even the hardcore collectors who want an authentic experience. Because with an FPGA done properly, you could get that. And now with that being taken out, a lot of those people are really kind of shaking their heads and not really interested. I mean, what really is the difference from the Retron 5? And price-wise, I gotta say, if you buy the base console and then several other modules to try and be able to do what the Retron 5 could do, you're gonna be spending a lot more money than a Retron 5 would cost you. I mean, you will be able to play more games because the base unit does a bunch of CD games, which the Retron does not, but you're gonna be spending a lot more money for basically emulators. And if you know me, if you're familiar with the channel, I've mentioned I have had a Retron 5 in the past, and I got rid of it after a month because it wasn't for me. Really, if I'm gonna play emulators, I'm just gonna load them up on my computer like the majority of people. So an emulator box, which is basically what this has devolved into, it doesn't really appeal to me. And because of the fact that this FPGA stuff was removed and it wasn't announced or nobody knew about it basically until the launch, a lot of people have been calling this a scam. It's true, they haven't really promoted the fact that this has been removed up to this point. I mean, you kind of have to do some digging on their website to find where it actually says that no, everything except for the Famicom module, which I'll talk about in a moment, has been removed the FPGA and it's emulation only. Now, there's a lot of things that I do like about the Polymega. I mean, it looks great. I like the idea of modules, so you just buy what you want, what you need. I like the fact that it has controller ports. They have their own controllers. I like their UI, the way everything looks. It seems very slick, very fast. And the original concept of blending FPGA with some emulation elements, that was something really appealing. Because emulation does have a bunch of benefits over playing on the old hardware. I mean, save states is a big one, and blending FPGA original cartridges with save states, that's something that was pretty exciting. I mean, some of those old NES games, maybe now I could finally beat them. But removing the FPGA, basically turning this into emulation only, that really kind of, I don't know, that really doesn't satisfy any of those itches for me. And now with all the people calling this a scam because of the fact that, you know, it was removed last minute, I don't think they're right. I don't think that this was intended as a scam. I don't think that they were trying to fool anyone. Now, from this point onwards, it's only my opinion. It's just conjecture from what I've seen. But what I think happened is that it became way more work than any of them anticipated to make all these modules run off of FPGAs. And the reason I say this is because to bring up again Analog, which has these FPGA-based clone systems, it took the creator of the Analog NT Mini, Kevtris, many years to actually develop the system that worked. He made the high-def NES kit, and this took him years to get right, working with FPGA, getting this thing perfect. And then it took him the better part of a year to get it working for the Analog Super NT. And he actually said in an interview I saw that he was very nervous about taking on the project for the Super NT because of how much work it would be to get this working. And he was actually lucky in a lot of ways in that some parts proved to be easier than he was expecting, and as a result he was able to get it done in the projected deadline. But it took him like several years and then the better part of a year to get this working for what essentially would be 2 modules in the entire library for the Polymega, and they were advertising support for over 30 consoles. Granted, a lot of it is like the European, Japanese PAL version, so like 3 consoles for the price of 1 or whatever, but that's still, even if we say 10 consoles, that's like 10 FPGA cores that they would have to make. And considering how long it took this guy who was considered to be an expert to develop these, I get the feeling that it probably took them close to the same amount of time to develop their Famicom module, which I think was probably the first one they worked on, because, I mean, it would make sense. You start with the simplest one for the earliest system that you're going to support, and you just kind of work your way down the line. Now, this isn't necessarily what it is, but to me, that's what would make sense. And so they finished developing the Famicom one and noticed just how much of an insane amount of work it is, and realized that it wasn't sustainable to do this for 30 consoles. And to make matters even worse, it's not just enough to have it standalone, it also has to work with your emulation and also communicate and work with your base module and stuff you would do in the future. And that just sounds like a massive amount of work. And I think when they realized this, they realized that they had to strip everything down to being just emulation. And again, I don't think that this was intentional. I don't think it was meant as a scam. I'm sure they meant to do everything FPGA from the start, and just with the massive workload, it wasn't doable. And it's very unfortunate, because that was the biggest selling point of this console. But without it, I mean, I understand, it's just disappointing. They also have said that in the future they might release some of their add-on modules with FPGA cores, like they might redo the NES, the Super Nintendo, the whatever, with an FPGA core. I mean, if that happens, cool, but I don't know how I feel about that, especially since they're launching with these non-FPGA cores, right? So what do? I mean, do you wait to buy the maybe better ones in a few years, or do you spend the money now on these ones that aren't as good, and then what do you do if better ones actually come out? I mean, you've basically wasted your money on this thing that's not as good. I mean, I don't know how to feel about that. It seems kind of shitty to their initial user base who would buy this thing to then just release a better version. I mean, maybe if they do a thing where it's like half off if you've bought the original or something, I don't know, but I'm not completely on board with that. I mean, I'd rather FPGA from the start. I mean, if you can't offer that now and you still want to offer that, wait until you can offer that and then release the console. But from the sounds of it, basically it's like a pre-order process, which is kind of like a fundraiser. They have to reach a certain number of units pre-ordered to be able to actually produce it. Seems like they just don't have the money like waiting to be able to do that kind of thing, which again, I understand, it's just disappointing. So at the end of the day, the Polymega, because of how they had hyped it up, what they were saying it was going to deliver, it just has failed to deliver on any of those promises, and that's really disappointing overall. I mean, it's great that they're making a system, and it's awesome that there will be a clone system that supports playing, like, you know, all these CD-based games. It runs in 1080p, and there's some other cool stuff that they are doing with it, like you can buy downloadable games, like digital games, and load them up onto the console. You can like rate them, sort them, do all this stuff that's very cool, that I think is great, that I wish some other consoles also had. I like most of what they're doing with it, but the moment they remove the FPGA, they definitely kind of lost me, and I feel like they lost a lot of people, and it's unfortunate, but that's just kind of the way it is. As it stands now, the Polymega is basically just the Retron 5 on steroids. Hopefully, all the emulation that they're doing with it works better than the Retron 5, and if it does, who knows, this could be the new standard for like a multi-system clone console, and if that's what they're now trying to aim for, that's like what their goal is, I mean, they could definitely get there if they have a very high attention to detail, but to appeal to like the hardcore collectors and everything, you've probably lost them by now, and I don't know if you can get them back without delivering what you originally promised. So no, I don't think the Polymega is a scam, but I will say I also don't think it's for me anymore. If you're interested and you want to get this, I will put a link to their website down in the description below, and I mean, if you want to get it, go for it. I mean, a lot of people have the Retron 5 and they love it. Personally, I'm not one of them, but I don't like look down on anyone for enjoying it. If you can find some enjoyment in that, great. If this system looks like it's a solution to all your needs, buy it. It's probably going to be pretty good for what it is. Just be aware of what it is and not what was promised, because there is a huge difference between those two things, what was promised and what you're actually going to get. And another thing to note is that the release date is set for sometime in 2019. There's no set date, which I guess is probably to give them time to get all the things working that aren't quite working as well as they want, which I understand, but I would think at the launch trailer you would want to have a release date, or at least if you can't say exactly, say like the quarter, or like give like, you know, a month or something like that. I wish that there was a little bit more info on that. But honestly, I wish the guys at Polymega all the best. I hope you have great success with this thing. I hope if you're somebody who buys it, you greatly enjoy it. It looks like it's going to be pretty cool, but honestly, overall for me, I'm just not interested. I mean, I've seen enough clone consoles to know what to expect, and I'm somebody who would prefer original hardware or something that is able to match original hardware, like an FPGA-based system. So yeah, guys, that pretty much wraps up this video. It probably turned out a little bit longer than I was intending. I thought this was going to be pretty quick, but in the end, I guess I had a lot to say. If you have your own thoughts, your own opinions on the Polymega, or if I got something wrong, or if new information comes to light, maybe the situation changes, definitely feel free to put all that info down in the comments. I'll be responding to them, and if there's something big that changes, maybe I'll pin a comment with that so people can see. But overall, I just kind of want to give my 2 cents on this, because I feel like it's something that a lot of people are talking about, and I've definitely been asked about as somebody who, you know, is very passionate about playing consoles in HD and has an entire series on it. Overall, the Polymega, it looks cool. It's just not for me. Maybe it's for you. So yeah, guys, thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Hey guys, my name is Rob Noire, and today I have a video for you all about playing your original Atari 2600 games in HD. And this video is happening because Super Nintendo with the Analog Super NT. I've also covered the N64 with the Ultra HDMI mod. And this video is going to be a lot of the same, where I'm going to cover how you can play your game